When he was a baby, the doctors told me, take him to the hospital, and I said, okay, what day? And he said, no, you need to take him now. At that point, I remember what I was wearing that day, and I was a single mom at that time. Everything just kind of faded to fear. The doctors told me he probably wouldn't live past 3 years old, 4 years old. And I remember holding him and just praying to God and saying, okay, God, if you're gonna take this baby, take him before I get to know him. Take him when he's little, before he becomes a man and a boy, a person, and he's my friend.
My brother has one of the most rare diseases in the world. Kids are supposed to grow up playing outside. Instead, he was often at the hospital getting blood tests. It was an idyllic childhood, but in the background, no one knew Derek was living with an orphaned anemia.
Yes. No, I loved her. First girl that I ever loved, man. I met her when I was in 8th grade. I was at a church retreat in 8th grade. And, sorry, I don't know what, it's misbehaving.
Ooh, I hear beef.
Oh, help's coming. Help's at the door.
Beef in here.
Help me!
Are you baby in here? Is that a girl talking?
Nope. I get that all the time, though. Thank you.
No, you said hello.
You know, when I call Walmart and I ask for something, they say, ma'am, let me transfer you.
Shut up.
I'm serious. My voice is just
You are cracking me up.
overly...
I wonder if you were supposed to get a specific volume or just 3 full units.
No, let's just do 3 today.
Derek and girls, or lack of girls in this case.
Hey, I'm really serious about that whole girl thing. That really happens.
Don't worry.
Let me tell you something. You know, it's a known fact. The first time that I called the first girl that I really liked,
Yeah.
the first time that I called her house, her dad answered the phone.
Yeah.
And he answered it with what? And I was like, I was in 8th grade, and I was like, hey, is Jenny there? And the dad was like, yeah, hang on. And then yelled to the house, Jenny, one of your girlfriends is on the phone.
Oh my God.
That's a true story.
Derek's kind of funny because he would like to have a girlfriend, I think, more than anything in the world.
When he was born, he didn't take a bottle correctly. He seemed to struggle with that, and I had an instinct that there was something wrong. And one of the nurses told me it was new mom jitters, and I told her that I wasn't a new mom. This was my second baby. I just knew when I would hold him, you know, something was different with him. And a few weeks after he was born, he began to get a little more pale until finally he got sick, and we figured it out. But there wasn't a normal. He was, from the very beginning.
It's an adhesive pad, and you wipe the area clean, and you stick this needle in, and you cover it and pull the needle out, so all that's left is a plastic catheter. And it's given kind of like an insulin pump is given, and you set your pump to the dose that you need, and all through the night this medication slowly infuses into your tissue, and your body begins to absorb that slowly, and that medication gets into your bloodstream and then begins to pull the iron out and be excreted. When you've received so much blood product that the iron that is left in the blood actually begins to build up inside of your body, and then it begins depositing in major organs. And then ultimately that could lead to multi-system organ failure. Really just making sure that you have the 10 hours to dedicate in time along with your normal life can be pretty difficult. Even tonight, I fell asleep and had to be woken up and reminded because it's late at night and you get tired and sometimes you forget about it, and there goes the first little bit.
That was probably one of my favorite times as the kids were growing up, going to the Friday night football games, watching my son play football, and during halftime, Derek, of course, marched in the band. And I think he actually started marching in the band before he was even in high school. It was a fairly small school, so they didn't have a really big band. So the more people they had, in the band, the better. But here's this teeny tiny Derek, no bigger than the drum he was carrying out on the football field. You almost couldn't even see him behind the drum. It was so big. He absolutely stole the show every time.
You were in the band all 4 years, right?
No, I was in the band all 6 years.
Oh, yeah, you guys do 7th and 8th, too. It's your tiny little band.
That was hurtful.
I started out as a new mom just trusting the doctors to know exactly what to do, and they would tell me, and that's what I thought was the right treatment plan.
In a way that makes it difficult for people to maybe have empathy for him, to feel for him, because most people don't believe that Derek is really sick.
As I got to know other mothers and other people who were affected by DBA, I learned a lot about being proactive and finding out from other parents what they were doing.
Is it harder for a child to try to understand why they need blood, or is it easier to let my child try to take a medication every day that could possibly cause increased risks later that he's not aware of now?
If there was anything else out there for him that I hadn't heard of, or that doctor hadn't heard of, it's such a rare disease that to trust a doctor at that time, it's better now because we have a lot more web information and a lot more communication between physicians and hospitals.
It was basically something that was there, was poorly understood, was a real interest of the people that I was learning from, and I just became fascinated by the disorder.
And you have the parents, the original parents, looking at you saying, 30 years ago we had nothing. No one knew this illness, no one knew anything about it.
Clearly, Diamond-Black fan anemia is what we consider an orphan disease. Orphan diseases are extremely rare disorders. I've heard numbers of a couple of 100,000 cases, but in reality, Diamond-Black fan anemia is the orphan of orphans. There are 30 to 40 new cases diagnosed every year in the United States and Canada.
Diamond-Black fan anemia is a condition. It is an anemia, but it's really called a syndrome.
His local doctor immediately referred us to Children's, but even at Children's, you got the sense that they didn't quite know what was going on.
It wasn't until much more recently that we started to really engage the parents and realize that they're the best advocates for everything we do.
A lot of times when you tell people that you're anemic, people say, oh, you have iron problems, and that wasn't the case here.
Most of the deaths that we've had from Diamond-Black fan anemia are associated, some of them are associated to the disease itself.
One of the doctors he worked with when he was a baby, I asked him, what the prognosis was, and he said, well, it's not good. I said, well, at least he doesn't have cancer. And the doctor said, well, actually, you might have been better off with cancer.
Cancer, we know there's a predisposition to cancer with these patients, so some of them will die due to cancer. Most of the deaths that we have in the DBA registry are due to the treatments that we use. Most of the deaths in the older population have been from iron overload, patients that are 30, 25, 35 years old.
And it's in a separate class of anemias. It's in what's called bone marrow failure syndromes.
At that time, I was told there were about 500 people with DBA alive in the world.
It's because my bone marrow was not able to produce an adequate amount of red blood cells.
We went through quite a lot of moments when we weren't sure what was going to happen, but we've been very positive for the most part. Ramey and I were at the hospital and had an uncomfortable day one time where we had a new doctor, and first of all, he called me Mrs. Free, and my name was Mrs. Yoakum. And we were married early in Derek's life. But he said, Mrs. Free, you're going to have to accept the fact that a certain percentage of these kids die. And I said, you really need to accept the fact that I'm prepared for him to live, and I don't want to focus on the fact that he could die.
In talking to Dr. Vlahos, she told me that I could help with research myself by becoming a part of the Diamond-Black fan anemia registry. I was under the impression that it was just for patients with the disease. But because they're finding out so much about the genetic side of things, they can use the genetics of the siblings and the parents and the grandparents to help pinpoint which genes are affected. So to me, this was crazy. They will have my DNA locked away somewhere, probably cryogenically frozen, and 100 years from now they will make another person just like me and I can go hang out with Walt Disney. Okay, probably not, but it's cool to think that I'm contributing to a cure for Derek. As they were trying to convince me to experience the pain of all of these patients and what they go through, they tried to get my camera operator to take some of the medicine that they give to patients so that they can get rid of the iron after transfusions. It's part of the chelation process. Well, they told him it tastes like you're eating gravel. Probably not a good selling point for the pharmaceutical companies. Lucky for him, they couldn't find any of the samples.
You know, actually I'm going to do this one because I can see a valve there.
I don't know what that means.
The valve will, if I go in under the valve, the blood may not come out.
Okay.
1, 2, 3.
Can you explain what this is doing?
Sure. This is to collect your blood so we can store your DNA in what we call the biorepository, which is basically a bank for DNA. They'll separate these cells and store your DNA so that when a test comes up or they're doing a particular research project for DBA, they'll call for your blood and we actually make a withdrawal and we'll send it to, say, the study they're doing at the NIH. So they'll screen for...
National Institutes of Health.
Right. They do the Human Genome Project, so they screen all of your genes. And de-identified specimen, so it's just a barcode, there's no name associated.
Okay. So it's as if I had a barcode on my head.
Exactly.
Okay.
Biorepositories.
Biorepository, sample and acquisition. So this is after hours. You're
Right.
probably salary, right?
Yeah.
So are you going to put this in a fridge until then?
I'm gonna put it right in here. It can stay at room temperature overnight,
Okay.
but I have to put in the specimen ID number. So what I'm gonna do is just take barcode.
It's probably safer that way, right?
And this is you.
My barcode.
Put the DNA in a well. And this is the robotic part, so it comes
Wow.
with a different specimen in each well.
Well, Derek is not in any way a shy child. He's happy to have people looking at him and talking to him, and I guess in a certain way he has tried to give back a little bit.
I can remember when he was just in elementary school going to a high school basketball game, and we're sitting there enjoying the game and it's halftime. Next thing you know, the halftime show appears and we look out on the court and see our son dancing around during the halftime show while the entire gym is chanting his name, Derek, Derek. And I don't know if his mom and I were horrified or what it was, but it was absolutely hysterical.
I would guess he has raised awareness as much as any child could.
I was like any kid. I was a dreamer. I wanted to do what I wanted to do, and that was going to be okay.
A couple years ago, he got a job with Red Cross, and the AmeriCorps program has agreed to do blood drives in his name to raise, to help increase blood supplies. And of course, not all that blood will be used for people with diseases like his. It'll be used for other things.
The way he has lived his life, just as a whole, makes me unbelievably proud of him.
And I think that Derek appreciates the quality of life he's had.
Parents always tell you, you can be whatever you want to be, except in the NBA or in the NFL or anything you have to run long distances in, and you probably shouldn't do anything really with contact. And while you're at it, you probably should steer away from this because of your health. And so yeah, there were things that I couldn't be if I wanted to be.
For a young married couple with no money and working odd hours, it certainly wasn't easy.
even though he had health issues, we tried to maintain as normal an atmosphere, you know, around him and anybody else.
It's easy now to look back in hindsight and realize that, you know, Derek didn't feel well. That's why he was throwing fits or not sleeping and keeping you awake and behaving the way he was.
I really, unless they knew specifically what was going on with Derek, I don't think that they would have had, you know, any idea whatsoever that we were dealing with a lot of these health issues.
When you're a young parent trying to make it through life, you know, you don't really think about that. So maybe we owe Derek an apology for some things, but you know, it was just the life we knew.
I knew that growing up I wasn't going to be able to play football, and I knew that growing up I wasn't going to be able to run long distances, and I knew that from an early age. We'd be on the playground playing tag, and I was always tagged it because I could never get anybody else. I would make it 300 feet, and I would have to take a second. And I don't think anybody really enjoyed playing tag with me anyways. I was always the first one caught, and I was always the last one to catch anyone. So we had to reset the game every recess because it wasn't really fair that I came out every time again, because no one enjoyed tag anymore. It just became kind of pointless.
And there are a lot of people out there who don't understand that Derek literally is a breath away from death at any minute.
Being in school, like I said, I couldn't do things that most people did, so I was really involved in the high school science club, and I did things like that. I was kind of dorky, and I was cool with that. It was kind of a cool dorky that I was never picked on. I was kind of like, that's Derek, and it's okay. He's a little dorky, but I'll be all right.
The science fair project, you know, on his open heart surgery is a good example. Channel 4 out of Columbus came down and did a story on Derek. So, you know, here's one kid out of the entire school who is getting media coverage for his project.
I had this undying love to participate in the science fair, and I know that that's ridiculous. No one ever has that untamable joy to be in the science fair, but I did. I loved it.
So sure, there were probably kids and definitely some adults who didn't necessarily like that.
And so I was fine with it, but because I was fine with it, it made other people fine with it. And that is one of the most important lessons you can learn in medicine, is that if you present an opportunity to become comfortable with your condition, then your patient is going to have an easier time dealing with that diagnosis.
In the late 90s, a controversy arose regarding designer babies. Basically creating a life for a purpose. Birth a child to save a child.
Will you come back to the donor child again and say, I need a kidney for the sibling, or something much more invasive? Ethicists fear people might start to select for height, eye color, long fingers so she can play piano. An innocent child who did nothing to anyone, they were desperate.
Desperate circumstances can call for desperate measures, but they rarely come without ethical issues. Many were upset with the idea. However, the Trebbing story gave some a reason to change their judgment.
My special person is my younger brother. He plays with me on the Wii. He helps me with the TV. He shows with me. My brother is special because he saved my life. He saved my life by giving me blood when I got stitches.
The bone marrow transplant was proposed to us as a cure only if we had a sibling that was an exact HLA match. And so we had Calvin tested, and Calvin wasn't an exact match.
Stem cell transplantation is a whole other issue. Patients can be cured of the anemia part by replacing their bone marrow with nice healthy bone marrow that does not have Diamond-Blackfan anemia.
And when she told me that she was using PGD in order to create a bone marrow match for her sick daughter who was already alive and needed this in order to cure her of a disease that she had inherited, I was flabbergasted.
I remember at the doctor's office and him explaining to us the science behind it. I couldn't imagine it being available to us at the time.
It requires patients extended stay in the hospital, usually 2 months or so.
I thought he was proposing stuff that was in the future.
Receiving chemotherapy agents where they lose their hair and have all the side effects of chemotherapy to get rid of the bone marrow that's there and then replace it with new ones.
I didn't realize that technology was available.
And then it requires them taking medication from anywhere from a year to 2 years to 3 years to keep that bone marrow there so their body doesn't reject it and the bone marrow doesn't cause side effects.
We knew we wanted more children, so that was easy. Is this right for our family? Do we feel comfortable doing this, using this type of technology? And how would we feel comfortable then if we had this third child if we needed the stem cells? At the time we thought we would use the umbilical cord.
In the best case scenario for a bone marrow transplant from a donor sibling, you would use the cord blood when the child is born, and that is normally discarded during a birth.
So there was a lot of questions, that we had to ask each other and make sure that we both kind of agreed.
Are you going to use this donor child for spare parts?
This data is 8 years old now, or 6 years old, but it was 50% of the transfusion-dependent adults, people.
Right. With Diamond Black Fan Anemia.
Their life expectancy was 40 years of age.
There are doctors who think that this is going to change the way that we recreate ourselves, the way people reproduce.
We were all hyped up about it. So we went off to camp and met all these other DBA families. And that's where it was kind of like a bit of a slap in the face, because it wasn't received the way we thought we would come in and be like, oh guys, look, this is what we can do, look what technology can do.
The first consideration is, should we be manipulating the randomness of birth?
We thought, this is new, this is going to cure her, this is awesome.
Should we look at a set of embryos and say, which one do I need, which one fulfills what I have to have, and select it and reject the others?
This was the first time we went to Camp Sunshine.
Camp Sunshine has been really instrumental in getting families together.
And we had already made the decision we were going to do IVF with PGD.
And having people really pour out their feelings to you, and you sharing your feelings to them, the commonalities of what you're experiencing.
We kind of were thinking we were headed towards transplant. We were, at that point, I would say we were like 70% toward, and we were pretty excited about it.
Anytime you use in vitro fertilization, you produce more embryos than you need to make a baby.
Not looking at the big picture, realizing that some of these parents can't use this technology.
In regular in vitro fertilization, the doctors are looking at the embryos and trying to select which one looks like it would make the healthiest child.
Prior to that point, we'd never met another family with DBA. I mean, it's a rare disease, so when we went there, it was it reminded me of college, taking courses one after another on education of the disease.
There are people who are concerned about that, whether it's okay to say, this cycle we're going to discard all the embryos because none of them match what we need.
Seeing the other children coping with and living with Diamond Black Fan Anemia was also interesting.
And then the last aspect of the embryos are, religious people who feel that discarding embryos for whatever reason is not okay.
And right before we left, we received this letter who was given to us by Dawn.
People who are fundamental Christians who believe that when you discard an embryo, you're discarding a life, and they're against in vitro fertilization as a whole.
It was about a family who was in the same position as us as far as their son had Diamond Black Fan Anemia.
And then also, of course, pre-implantation genetic diagnosis, where they contend that the embryo has to pass a test, in order to be allowed onto the next phase of life.
He was a little older. I think he was like 11. And they went through bone marrow transplant.
He had a sister who was an exact HLA match.
And it did not work for them. And they wrote a 3-page letter explaining how it should be the last resort and what every step they took, and it was very detailed.
And it wasn't that it did not work and the son went back to having DBA. It did not work and the son did not survive. So they lost their son at 11 years old, and thinking the same way we were. We're going to transplant, we're going to cure them.
And it was a hard letter to even read through.
They had to decide whether to jeopardize their child's life in order to save it.
Yeah.
Because that swayed us to of what hospital to go to when we finally did decide.
Yeah.
And the other big component, again, but getting back to the pros and cons, was Dr. Lipton and Dr. Ballard. Dr. Ballard, who's at Memorial Sloan Kettering, the transplant doctor, said to us, it's an inverse relationship as far as the success rate. The older you are, the worse the odds.
Success rate of transplant, right.
Of successful transplant. And the most ideal time frame was for a child less than 5 years of age.
It is inherited as an autosomal dominant, meaning that if an individual has it, half of their children are at risk to develop the disease.
The Trebbings were really lucky. Everything went great. It took them 2 cycles, but they did have a donor child.
Using IVF with PGD and going to transplant is only for a small population of DBA families.
Katie is doing better, but not every family has this option.
She's a boy. She's a boy,
male blood.
according to blood.
So they, Dr. Ballard joked that, it's a CSI type of show where she can get her brother in trouble because she has his
So if she
exact
did
match.
something and they had to do a DNA blood test, Christopher would get in trouble for it.
Jamesport, New York is home to the Daniela Maria Arturi Foundation. Started out of one grieving mother's home, the organization now backs DBA initiatives in Washington and across the world.
I am a mom of a little girl who unfortunately passed away as a result of treatment complications for Diamond-Black fan anemia. I made up my mind after Daniela passed, I guess, to try to do something to honor my beautiful daughter and be sure that what happened with her in her treatment would not happen again.
She had to do something to try to reach out and find out why did her daughter die. No one knew about DBA, and she wanted to say, I'm going to make a difference.
I'm going back in my head and thinking, how do I tell the story of Kevin and Brett and Tina and Mary Kay? And how do I not let them down in this next 2 minutes? How do I let their story be told in a way that is fair to them and that their deaths have a purpose, that they have a purpose. But in rare diseases, if there's not much research going on, there's an awful lot of guesswork that occurs in treatments, and you can be on the wrong side of that guess.
And by the way, that's how activism starts. Something happens, unfortunately, to someone you love, somebody in your family. And I said, well, what are you doing? And she said, well, we're trying to get research money.
Came to Washington very young, right out of college, and this was the type of work I wanted to do, was to really do something to advance rare disease advocacy and help people understand the value of rare diseases. I suffered a lot of loss, including my mother while I was in college, to a very rare disease that it was my breaking point in terms of hearing that not enough people were dying with your disorder, or not enough people were suffering with your disorder.
And I said, well, why don't you write me a proposal and let me look at it, and let's see what I can do.
We knew right away when Congresswoman Carolyn McCarthy met Maria Arturi that she was an absolute perfect match because of her nursing background, the tragedy that she had suffered in her family, and we knew that it would be a great partnership between Marie, Congresswoman McCarthy, Dave and I to really sort of try to find the right people within Congress, within the administration, within the agencies that would really understand the value of this type of work.
What we would do is go in and say, this is what we believe. if we could have your support, that would be terrific.
This basically is a children's book, but it's basically there to teach children how Congress works. And so I started going around member to member, and on the front page, I would have exactly why I was getting everybody to sign the book, and it would be then auctioned off at a fundraiser so that the foundation would have money to, again, promote how do they educate the patients, how do they educate other people, and how do we get research money.
It's a process of not forgetting who helped in the beginning. It's a process of letting them know the progress we're making. It's the process of letting every all-star, if I say, in the research community, as well as the young fellows coming up, who have, young fellows have actually had some of the main advancements, but to let everybody know that both money is available, interest is in this issue, and they too can be a star if they help.
We call it the Well, and that's in the Capitol. That's where we go down to vote. Anyway, I was down there, and there was a state, I forget who the prime minister was, giving a speech. And the vice president was sitting up in the chair. And he was waiting for everybody to settle down and whatever. And I'm scurrying around, going from the senators to the members. And I look up, and I'm going, oh, I'll get Nancy Pelosi, who was the Speaker of the House at that time. And ran up to Dick Cheney, I believe it was, and I said, would you sign my book? And he said, well, what is it? And I actually had a chance to explain to him, same as I did with President Bush. And last year I was able to get President Obama to sign the book.
Yeah, here in Washington it's a matter of priorities. And sadly it gets down to budget priorities typically. And so many people want to look at the greatest good for the greatest number in terms of funding anything.
But anyway, the C-SPAN was watching me scurrying around. I didn't know that, I was being followed. But this also gave an opportunity, because people said, you were running around on the House floor and you had a book in your hand. What were you doing? And it gave me one more opportunity to talk about why I was doing this, why I was getting so many signatures. And it also gave me another opportunity to talk to the senators.
We had to take a look at it and say, well, how could spending significant amount of money on a patient population of 600, how could that really benefit, the community as a whole, if you will? And what we did is we looked at that. We heard about the link with cancer, the link with birth defects, and whether or not studying such a small population would be worth it. And we felt it would be, and as we checked with researchers, they felt not only that it would be, it'd be extremely significant.
Orphan diseases, I think, have always been a big focus at NIH, particularly in the intramural program where I work. And the reason is because these inherited rare diseases are often caused by mutations in one gene or maybe 2 or 3 genes.
As we discovered more and more genes in DBA, it was confirmed that it was a ribosomal protein problem.
And they're kind of a window on much more complex and common diseases.
We were told that studying these diseases could help unravel clues to cancer.
Since the National Human Genome Research Institute finished the Human Genome Project, and we now have a sequence of the human genome, there's really been an explosion of tools and technology that can really help us understand both rare and common diseases in much greater detail.
We have ribosomes everywhere throughout our body, and so it was believed in the ribosomal world that if you had a defect in your ribosome, you would die. So the question was, why red cells?
Our recent work has really been in the diagnostic area. We've tried to take some of the new DNA technology that's out there to try to find the mutation in every patient that has Diamond-Blackfan, not just the patients who have the most common mutations.
It totally changed the way people thought about research in this area. It revolutionized it, really.
In the genome, there are about 80 genes that encode the subunits that make up the ribosomes, and these are places in cells where RNA gets translated, and Diamond-Blackfan patients have mutations in these ribosomal protein genes.
It was this whole other area of research that then came into our world.
I would like to be able to give everyone a molecular diagnosis so that we can screen the world for the perfect match donor.
I feel like Daniela came here for a reason, and I guess in a way I feel blessed to feel that.
There are deaths. Some of them are due to the illness and some of them are due to complications of the treatments that we're hopefully going to get better as we figure out new treatments for this disease.
Since it affects so few people, the money for research isn't exactly booming and growing.
Red blood cell transfusion, steroids, and stem cell transplantation, bone marrow transplantation, have been the treatment for Diamond-Blackfan anemia for decades. But recently, and for the first time, we have enough science where we can start to really look at red cell production in a way that we couldn't in the past.
And what makes me the most hopeful about DBA is always looking for that cure, but we'll stop in between for better treatment options.
Hear the stories. Jason Rose, Don Baumgartner's son, Jack Pereira, and they are just really compelling.
There is so much hope now.
There is a good possibility for a drug to be developed or gene therapy or something that will help these people live a life free of transfusion and side effects of steroids.
I hope that there will be a cure for Diamond-Blackfan anemia.
The parents of DBA have done a wonderful job, as much as they can.
When you think about, people sitting around their kitchen table and talking and saying, well, we can't change anything, it's the government. Well, they're wrong.
And there are a lot of ways that you can do that. I think people get intimidated by Washington and they don't think that they really have a voice.
We really have become quite proficient at singing for our supper.
In raising funds and awareness and doing fundraisers and stimulating that fund to pay people to do research. And there's certain research being done in small pockets here and there.
More importantly, the research that's looking at a cure for the larger population of DBA is, what's important at this time.
We rely on federal grants, foundation support, and we have to make the case. And the truth of the matter is, if we can't convince people who control the purse strings that this is a very important problem, then we don't know what we're doing.
You're blessed with a new day. And for me, I look at that differently because I am truly blessed with a new day every day I wake up.
Madam Speaker, I rise in strong support and as a proud co-sponsor of this resolution, recognizing the importance of the federal government's continued support for research into the rare bone marrow failure disorder for which there is no known cure, known as Diamond-Blackfan anemia.
We should encourage further efforts to clarify the natural history of DBA, continue efforts to raise awareness and ease access of information about DBA, encourage research efforts that will advance treatment options and seek a cure, and encourage cross-institutional research initiatives to study the intricacies involved in this rare inherited disease.
And as always is the case, although the word is rare and operative, the point is if somebody is suffering from DBA, they're suffering. And just because there may not be tens of thousands a year, the fact is that suffering doesn't go away.
We hear constantly of these very rare diseases, and the families sometimes feel they have no hope. And I would encourage them to reach out on the internet to find the information they need to. The foundation that was started 10 years ago has come such a long way, where researchers from across the world now come in for a conference every year to find out more on what work has been done. And even though the cure for DNA has not happened yet, the other research has helped many, many other families. So please join me in supporting this resolution and telling the families and the children with DBA that they are not alone.